All right, here we are, part 3. Okay, so another problem that people often run into with this essay is over quoting. So I've been trying to sort of prevent us from going down this path with the homework assignment from last week when we were thinking about like quoting. Um, but I want to kind of let's just kind of remind ourselves about quoting, right? That when you have secondary sources in particular, you want to quote as little as possible. And I have to say that you guys did a really, really good job with this on essay 2. In fact, not a single one of you was over quoting Scholes, and that's fantastic. So let's keep that up here. So especially when you're working with your secondary sources, it's really easy to depend too much on quotations. So let's keep it under control. Remember that we want to quote secondary sources as little as possible. Under only very rare circumstances will you ever do more than a sentence. And ideally just like a phrase, and only when it's something that really is too good, to paraphrase, right? Only something that's really, really fantastic. Something that you feel like you just can't do justice to it, paraphrasing. With primary sources, you can quote a little bit more. It's a little more acceptable to quote. That said, remember that it's not a good idea to quote statistical information, because that's the kind of thing that can be paraphrased very easily. Remember back to that homework assignment with the Diane Ravitch quotes about rating teachers. Remember how we worked in that assignment on figuring out how to take statistical information and rephrase it. Stats are like the classic example of something where how you put it is usually not very important, right? It's like the number that's important, right? So you can rephrase it without losing anything. It's the opposite of something that's really quotable. So we want to quote a secondary source if there's a really super phrase or a great term, and never where you can paraphrase. If you can paraphrase it, do so. And remember that so with primary sources, we want to quote only if you care about the specific language and if you're going to analyze it, and especially with statistical information, you always want to paraphrase. So let's go through some examples. According to the article by Amanda Lenhart, about 1/3, 32%, of all teenagers who use the internet say they've been targets of a range of annoying and potentially menacing online activities. Well, that is statistical information, right? So no, we don't keep the quote, right? That is not an example of a place where you have to where it's acceptable to quote. You might quote, like if you were going to quote anything here, you might quote just the phrase annoying and potentially menacing. You might quote that, but even that I probably wouldn't. But it definitely, like 1/3 of all teenagers, no, just rephrase it, right? Approximately 30%, right? You can rephrase that easily. But let's also remember we're in APA style land with this essay. So let's think for a second about that signal phrase. There's something wrong with that signal phrase in APA style. And remember, the APA style doesn't want first names, right? So if we're not even going to put the first name in the reference list, we're definitely not going to put it in the signal phrase. So just say Lenhart, according to Lenhart, or a Lenhart, right? And that's totally fine. The other thing that's wrong with that signal phrase, anybody notice? The date is in the wrong place, right? We hang the date right off the name, right? According to Lenhart, parentheses 2007 and parentheses, and then at the end we'll put the page number, or if we can't find a page number, NP in the place where the 2007 is here. All right, let's look at these. Although managers are required to provide staff with guidance and training in what is and is not acceptable behavior online, P 2013, it's the nurse's responsibility to know what is okay and what is not. So I don't know about y'all, but to me that is classic time where we do not keep the quote. We do not have, that is not, you can paraphrase that easily. And there's no signal phrase, so paraphrase that sucker. Pete, 2013, argues that even when supervisors train their staff about acceptable online behavior, it's the nurse's responsibility. No problem. Second example, the potential consequences will depend in part on the particular nature of the nurse's conduct. These are examples from a paper that was about online bullying among nurses, which apparently is a thing. Okay, so here you'll note the complete lack of a signal phrase, which is bad. But also, why would you quote that? That is totally paraphrasable, right? That is not something to quote. This is an instance of overquoting. Absolutely. There's nothing that's like some sparklingly beautiful phrase, right? That has to be that is so perfect that you can't do justice to it while paraphrasing. That is not the case there. But let's look at number 3. This is from a paper that was about social media use in the Arab world. Likewise, Gaza Mom is a Muslim woman from Palestine who's a media activist. As she wrote that her website was about everything that entails from potty training to border crossings. So to me, this is an example of a quote that you keep, right? Everything that entails from potty training to border crossings, that is fabulous. You could not do justice to that in paraphrasing. So that is an example of one that you totally keep. Okay. So just whenever you're quoting, right, go back and think about whether or not you need the quote, or you could accomplish everything that you need from paraphrasing. Okay, so I have one last problem to talk about, and that is citational efficiency. We talked about this a little bit last time, but it's time to kind of dig in a little bit further. An example. Colorado has tried to regulate the drug by ensuring that retail outlets that sell marijuana do not sell anything else. Room 2014. Additionally, on-premise consumption of marijuana is not allowed at these locations. Room 2014. This is one of those moments where you start to feel like you're getting kind of banged in the head a little bit with Room 2014. Like, I get it. So this is a spot where you can let me see if I did it. Yeah. So where we can easily, like, first use a signal phrase, but then also this is a good opportunity to combine sentences, something we're going to talk about a little bit later in this lecture as well, in order to kind of get out of this sort of ugly, the ugliness of this repeated identical citation. Just do this. Room 2014 notes that Colorado, yada yada, combine the sentences, and everything looks much cleaner, it's much more efficient. One more example. The rise in technology that's needed to keep up with the demands of Netflix and others like it, and the loss of subscribers, has caused some of the biggest companies to attempt to join forces. We cite DeSilver 2014. The Pew Research Center shows us just how broad a reach the biggest cable companies would have had if such a significant merger had occurred. Yeah, you get the point. We have 4 consecutive sentences, each of which has exactly the same citations. Now, don't get me wrong. I am much happier to see this than to see no citations at all. So this is better than no citations, absolutely. But it's not beautiful. It's technically correct, but it's not nice to its reader. Here's a better version. According to DeSilver, so note we start with the signal phrase, and we have that same first sentence. And then we have a couple, in these subsequent sentences, I use more signal phrases to indicate that we're still talking about that same source. DeSilver shows us just how broad a reach the biggest cable companies would have had. And then the next sentence gives us DeSilver's example. And then DeSilver points out that. So when you're in that situation where you have a bunch of consecutive sentences about one source, cite at the beginning and then keep combine sentences where you can, but then also just use signal phrases to make sure your reader knows that we're still talking about that same source. And then if it's totally clear to your reader from your sentences, you don't have to repeat that citation. And then, your paper is prettier and nicer and more elegant. And that's what we're going for, guys. Y'all are ready. y'all are writing not just for correctness, but for, elegance. All right. Okay. So I am not going to get all the way through this next chunk in this segment of the lecture, but that is okay. So for almost everybody in SAT, with your SAT revisions, I started leaving comments about combining sentences. So I wanted to spend some time talking about that, about why I've been leaving that comment for so many of you, and then what we can do about it. So what we're talking about now is an issue of style. So it's not about grammatical correctness or anything like that. It's a a more advanced issue, the issue of style, of making things elegant and pretty, not just correct. Flow is totally an issue of style, and it's we've all probably gotten comments on papers in the past where somebody's like, this doesn't flow very well, and that can be a really irritating comment to get because you don't really know what that means necessarily. It's not a very explicit or descriptive kind of way to talk about what is about your reaction to a piece of writing. But I think that when readers complain about flow, what they're really talking about is short sentences, like too many sentences that are the same length in a row. I think that combining sentences is the best way to kind of make your writing flow better. So here's an example, short and choppy. My room was littered with tissues. I had a cold. With improved flow. My room was littered with tissues because I had a cold. So that first example, if you have a lot of sentences in a row that make that move, you start to feel kind of like you're driving with someone who's just learning how to drive a standard transmission, who doesn't know how to shift very well yet, right? It's just sort of like back and forth, stop and go. The second example is much better because it's smoother. And the reason that it's smoother is because it adds information about how those two, what were two discrete sentences in the first example. The second example shows us how those sentences fit together. It's like we've completed the puzzle, right? We've fit the puzzle pieces together in number 2, right? We've added a word that shows us how those two, that is very explicit about how those two sentences fit together. It's that because. So when we combine sentences, we can do so by using joining punctuation, the semicolon, the colon, or the dash. I know that those are scary punctuation marks, but it's really easy. You can use a semicolon or the dash is very flexible. You can use that a lot, but the semicolon, the only tricky thing is that you need to have an independent clause on either side. That just means that the stuff on either side of the semicolon needs to be capable of standing on its own as a sentence, right? So it's a complete sentence on either side. But I'm not going to make you use semicolons if you don't want to. The easiest way to combine sentences is to use a conjunction. And these conjunctions are especially great because they give us more information. So using words like, for, and, nor, but, yet, so, if, because, while, since, when, although, all of these kinds of conjunctions give us more information. So let's just kind of move through some examples here. I glanced at the clock. The time was 3 a.m., right? Easy. When I glanced at the clock, the time was 3 a.m. Flows so much more smoothly. You can tell spring is here. The birds are coming back. Add a because, right? It might rain. You should take an umbrella. Add a so. There's no, usually there's not only one way to combine the sentences, right? But I hope you're starting to get kind of the sense of why it can be stylistically nice to combine these sentences. Okay, I better stop this, and I shall see you back here in a moment for the last segment.